Welcome everybody to the Frontend Lightning Talks. Nice that you're all here. I'm your host today. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy. Eat maybe something. It's still dinner time. But mostly relax and enjoy. Questions can be put in the chat for each presentation. And please note, mute yourself. The session will be recorded as well. And put your video off. All right, what will we do today? Well, the program, welcome, introduction session, small slide, of course. What we're going to do is talk about accessibility at ABN AMRO with Daniel, and afterwards there's time for some questions. So each presentation has a time slot of 20 minutes. There will be some questions answered. If we walk out of time or run out of time, then we can, of course, at the end, in the closing and questions, still do some things. After the first presentation, we'll be doing Beyond Screen Sizes, Responsive Design in 2021 with Kilian. Always nice. And from SOSTI, WCAG, Why Your A Still Fails from Drazen. Well, we organized this meetup for everybody. And we are from SOSTI. SOSTI is a big company in IT, and as Frontend community, we are very active. We organize these things. You can also see it in the Frontend meetup group. We like to be one community together. We do a lot of things, even other things than Frontend. We generally make technology work, so that's always good. We're really technology lovers, and that's very nice to have. But we're talking about Frontend here right now. We have some big Frontend plans for this year. On the 9th of February, we already had a JavaScript and framework session. If you couldn't be there, sad, but that's why we have the agenda right now. You're here right now for the 13th of April about CSS, UX, accessibility, and WCAG. Please note, this is not a final calendar, so there's nothing final yet. Our next session, we will be around the 8th of June, and probably about hybrid and native mobile development. If you want to present, please contact the contact organizers. That's always nice. Or if you have cool ideas, feedback, etc., that's always good to hear. We are open to that. So basically, different subjects, different speakers, of course, from different companies as well. We also have ABN AMRO today. But we hope to give you the same awesomeness in general, so that's really nice. Yeah. Oh, the presenters for today. First, Daniel Frey. After that, we will have Kilian Valkhof, and after that, we have Drazen. I think it's time for the first presentation, and that will be accessibility at ABN AMRO. That will be Daniel Frey. So, Daniel, the floor is yours. You can share your screen.
Yes, thank you very much for having me here. I'm really excited. And for us to start, let me know when you can see my presentation.
We can see your screen.
Is it
and
big?
We can see your presentation. It is big. Nice.
All right, so welcome everybody. I'm a part of the Accessibility Guild in ABN AMRO, and today I'm going to show you what we've been up to, how we started this journey, and what was our findings. So who am I, first of all? My name is Daniel Frey. I work as a software engineer in ABN AMRO. I'm originally from Israel, so I moved here around a year ago for my Dutch girlfriend, and also because it's just a beautiful country. It was really nice to move here. And yeah, been around for around 4.5 years, and focusing mostly on front end. You can guys also follow me on Twitter. This is my Twitter account, and I always love to stay on up to technology and share a lot of new tech things. So you can follow me if you want. So to kick off our presentation, we're going to talk about what is accessibility, and of course this A11Y. A lot of people sometimes think, what the hell is this? So I'm going to try to cover it up for you. So first of all, accessibility in our web. Who does it help to? It can help to people that have some disability in their, or maybe color wise, so they're color blinded. It can also help for people that cannot, for example, touch their screen, so they can only integrate with a screen reader, for example. And we also, yeah, basically the accessibility, who does it help? Everybody that has a certain problem, right? That they cannot do or be like normal people. Usually, yeah. So to the next thing is that we have a A11Y. What does it stand for? Basically, between the A and the Y, there is 11 characters. So this is where it comes from. Basically, you have this project that is a community-driven effort to make digital accessibility easier. And going on to the next, what is it for? What is all of this? We're going to try to cover it up and explain why we have accessibility, but really a nice paragraph here is that to ensure that every country applies the same guidelines for digital accessibility, the World Wide Web, so W3C, has developed the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines together with partners such as the Accessibility Foundation and other organizations. So to make a long story short, this is basically a very short and brief introduction to who does accessibility help and what is it in general and what is the abbreviation of A11Y stands for. So now that we have that cleared up, let's try to take a look at compliance levels. So in accessibility, we have 3 compliant levels, as you can see in the picture here. And we have A, double A, triple A, and basically the most easiest way to look at this thing is that it's just 3 guidelines that are divided each into a number of success criteria. These are measurements criteria that help a web or app builder to meet the guidelines. They are also used to test accessibility of a digital application. The success criteria have 3 levels, A, AA, and triple A. These levels indicate to what extent a website is accessible. So if we just quickly take a look on how we can read this kind of levels, it's basically to take a look at the color. Is I don't know, every screen will maybe see it different, and this is also why we have this issue. But yeah, so you will see some colors are a bit greener than the other, right? But basically, we want to try to have the highest contrast level on the color wise, uh, so that people that have a sort of difficulty with colors, it will be more yeah, bolder to them, or just the color that the designer is intended to show, right? So this is a shortly about the color, but of course it also comes with the audio and captions, for example, and etc. We'll not go in too deep in that. If you want to, you can search about this, but this is really a short introduction about this. And there is another thing that from September 23, 2020, all websites of Dutch government agencies must meet these guidelines at least at the level of double A. Now, banks also include in that. So this is also one of the reasons why we were thinking like we are a bank and we should have it, obviously, right? We have so many users. But what is in it for me as a developer is the next slide. But here at ABN, we're trying to aim for triple A. In the presentation, I have like a small clapping when I do this. I don't know, probably you guys cannot hear it because I didn't share my sound. But we aim to have a triple A. And why is that? So first of all, every person that hears about accessibility will think like, hey, what is it for me? Why should I care? So I try to put some points, and some of you might agree, some of you not, but these are my strong fundamentals. Why? So first, of course, this is to ABN or a bank, possibly more important, but yeah, we are a bank and our product is being used by all kinds of people, and it's our duty as developers to make our code accessible to all our users, right? Secondly, if we care about people and their needs, it will reflect also in our day-to-day work, obviously. Thirdly, accessibility is often the difference between someone being able to participate or being completely excluded. Accessibility is not a nice to have, it's respecting people's fundamental rights. And fourthly, accessibility may not be the easiest part of our work, but it is always worth the effort. So for me, when I work on accessibility and yeah, the satisfaction that I have of people actually using my code, using my software, right? And they're from all kind of yeah, they have a sort of issue or whatever they have, that it just basically helps them and it's accessible to everybody. That gives me a big satisfaction. And I hope that, yeah, it's not easy, right, to go through the code and try to make it accessible. We will see later on what we did actually to make it a bit easier for us as developers. But yeah, this was a big point for me at least as well. And lastly, as front-end developers using HTML5, we should write semantic HTML that let alone brings meaningful code, but also helps with accessibility and SEO and other stuff. So basically, here to the right, you can see a website with divs and versus a website with a header, article, figure, footer, for example. These are all semantic HTMLs introduced to us in HTML5. Let's use them. They're also helping us as developers to understand what are different parts of the website, but also with accessibility, it helps. So moving to the next, maybe you guys or you monkeys think, how do I start write accessible code, or how long will it take me? So introducing Axie. Axie is our big hero, and why is it? And we're going to talk about it in the next slide. But just, yeah, it's a big hero, right? We as developers, we like to automate things. We don't like to think too much, maybe sometimes. And of course, we always have to have a kind of open source project that will help us do that. So this is Axie. It's open source. And if you guys don't know it, please check it out after this. I'm going to give you quickly walk through why and what are the highlights of this. So basically, we have something in Axie that is build breaker. So it integrates with Azure and Jenkins pipelines. This is what we're using in ABN. So this is what we wanted it to be integrating with. Number two, it's testing multiple pages. It's able to test multiple pages in your project. Now, what I mean by that is that, for example, you have your test cafe. We usually use it for functional tests, and you have Jest. So Jest Axie functional testing. So Test Cafe Axie, it's existing. It's integrating with both of them. But now if you will test your code in Jest, what it will do, it will test only not the entire flow, right? It will not test all your pages. And we come to the point that we're as developers lazy and we want things to be faster and easier, so we don't have to write for each component its own accessibility thingy. So what we did is that basically we found that Test Cafe just helps with that, and I'll show you guys later on how does it work. And number three, that the standards, so the ability to test code in minimum compliance of level AA. So that's nice that we have that integration, that it's always also with the fifth point, actually the third and the fifth point, it's always up to date. So, and the number four is that its ability to run locally. So for those folks around here that do test with Jest and Test Cafe, you always get a report on your local machine and you can see kind of what's going on, right? So this the same going to happen if you use Axie. And then the sixth point is that it's a shadow root, so ability to penetrate shadow root. Amazing, right? If you use the web component. So going to the next, how does Axie looks in practice? So I wanted to do for you guys like a live demo, but then I was thinking like, is it gonna maybe take too much time because I want to show some few things. So I shared screenshots and you guys can just I'll show you. We created something nice later. But Axie in practice. So Axie has a Chrome plugin. You don't have to even install it on your projects. You can just go and search this and you will have a Chrome plugin out of the box. You can click search and it will search on your page and give you all the issues that accessibility wise you have and how you can solve them. They also show you like the source of the element where the problem is and how you can solve it. So just everything given to you outside the box. I mean, guys, what else can you ask for, right? So this is Axie Chrome plugin. The next one is Axie Jest, which is, like I said, Axie is just amazing. It's just integrates with everything, right? So you have Axie Jest, and this is how it looks like when you write your unit testing. It's basically going to tell you that it's expected to have no violations, and then it's going to show you where was the error, and images must have an alt, right? An alt tag. And so these are just one of the prerequisites of accessibility, right? So, and then for going forward to Test Cafe, so basically this is how the error will look like violations wise. So that's also quite nice. And you even have Axie Storybook. Oh my God, yet another thing. So you basically, for you folks out there that use Storybook, it's amazing. We love it at ABN AMRO because we have a design system, but we also, yeah, we basically integrates with our with Storybook. So that's amazing. You can see violations, what it passes, etc. So this is how it looks like in practice. Now, for you guys, you probably might be like this guy here or this animal and saying like, yeah, I love this tool, but does it do 100% of the work? Now, guys, I hate to break it for you, but it doesn't. So there is still work that you guys need to do. It covers around 30% of the standards. I'm not going to say this name because I don't like to say that name. So you guys can just read it out there. The WCA 2.1 standards. So here you go. I said it. Well, and the number two is that we have a migration effort from both the community and the Web Components Guild, depending on the component. So here at ABN, we have like a Web Components Guild. We have a kind of guild for Frontend also, and we like to divide our work when it comes to those parts. So we are all accountable. And so basically, the point of this of me showing you guys is that yeah, there will be required effort probably if you're gonna integrate this at your place. That if you have a design system, then it's gonna require some efforts from the community, right? Unless you have a big team in charge on that, so that's also really nice. Number three is that there is also manual testing by developers. And how do you do manual testing, right? How do I test my code as a developer? I have this amazing tool, Axie. I think it does most of the job. Well, there is of course the manual testing part, and I'm going to cover it quickly. How do I test my code? So you can use a screen reader, right? I hope you guys know what is a screen reader. Just gonna basically go on your website. It can also work on all the other software that you have on your laptop or PC. But speaking of the web, it will just basically go and read it out loud, everything that it sees on the website, giving that it's accessible, hopefully, guys. But these are the recommended ones that one of our friends at the community tested. His name is Richard Hoving. He's also part of the Accessibility Guild. But yeah, all of them are able to enter and see elements in the shadow root. These are the one that we tested and we trust and we also really like. So here is the list for you. And then also manually testing your code is so just let's say you have this image in your website and the alt key is girl in the jacket, but we have to make sure that the value of the alt key indeed means what the image represents, because you guys can write whatever you want in that alt key tag, but and you will pass Axie because they will say you have a key there, but like you need to make sure that it indeed means what it represents, the image. So this is just a small one, a small part, right? You can also do what I really recommend to do as a developer is just leave out your mouse, kick it out, just use your keyboard and try to work around your website, like see how it integrates. And if you don't know how to do that, just you keep on clicking tab, enter, see how your elements are working for you. And if it works nice and you can do what your app's supposed to do, then you're in good hands, right? But if not, then you should be putting it more to work. And how to put to work, I didn't cover in this presentation, but it is nice to maybe do some your own investigation, and maybe in the future we'll create a guide on how to test your website manually. But I'm sure that there is amazing guides out there as well. But this is how you can test your code in a small scope, or yeah, well, in large also. But how do we migrate as well? So yeah, there is actually a guide that we created, and I will share it with you quickly just to show you how it looks like. It will be available to everybody to use as soon as I will share the link or the presentation later on. But I just want to show you a quick grasp. Can you see my screen for the Chrome?
Yeah, we can see your Chrome and we'll see your document.
Yes, so this is a quick document on how to migrate to Axi. You have examples there of code, how to npm install it, how to set it up on your code, and also for Storybook, we explain how it should look like and known issues, for example, things like that. So I will share it with you guys as soon as we've really finalized it. It's quite complete already, but yeah, maybe I will ask from the event organizers to send you guys an email with all of those things. So this was quite fast. I tried to do it, but this was my presentation, and now I'm open to answer some questions in the chat.
Thank you, Daniel. I think we can do a very good clap emoticon. Everybody can find that. That's always good. Or else our ears will tear off. Nice. I see we have a lot of questions. Firstly, I want to say very cool to have some insights at ABN AMRO. It's nice to know that actually is an out-of-the-box tool. And I think everybody will at least have a look at it. And the practical tips are always welcome. I see the questions are coming in. Let's see. The first one was from Ankit. Do you write yes test in general for entire page or to specific part of the functionality?
So basically for Jest, like I mentioned, you can test each component, right, in Jest. But we wanted to do that. We should do that, but we were thinking like, in ABN AMRO, we have a design system. They're all having web components. Then let's test them with those tools. But no, actually, sorry, I'm mistaken. No, so Test Cafe we have implemented in ABN AMRO everywhere, but we do want to not use only one flow to test it. So you can choose between that, right? So you can have your just covered with the Axi, but then if you are a bit lazy, but if you don't want to have each component tested separately, you're just gonna use Axi and Test Cafe, because this cafe is able to go through all your website, right, and scan it through everything and just test it really easy. So for us, it was way easier to test web components because it's each component with Jest and just test it, right? But the Test Cafe, for example, if I have a big Vue.js application, I have the Test Cafe already. I just put that I expect no violations, and you will see that also in the guide that we created. And then yeah, it's just out of the box testing all your flow, and you have all the violations given to you.
Yeah, I mean, if a page has, let's say, it should have only one H1 tag. So all those schemas you can already test in a general suite, and then test specific web components, like you said, in the storybook or wherever it is exported.
Yeah, so Jest is to test one component at a time, and Storybook is to test your entire flow. This is what was our biggest benefit, right? So we want to test the entire flow, multi-pages, etc. Yeah.
Nice. Good to hear. I think that pretty much answered your question, Ankit. Great. There's another question from Francisca. Does it also work with Angular projects?
We still have Angular JS projects in ABN. But we didn't we didn't try it, but it should work because Angular, it's not Axi Angular, right? It's Axi Jest. So if you use Jest, then it should work. If you use Storybook, then it should work because it's just integrating with those testing. And if it doesn't work, well, I don't expect that, but then you have your Chrome plugin for worst case scenario, right? Because you have Axi Chrome plugin. Of course, it's not going to break your build, because then you cannot enforce anything, but at least for just to try it out, it's nice, right? But yeah, it shouldn't be a problem because Angular, it's not really connected to one another.
I think this both regards the Angular, yes, but I think also the newer versions, hopefully.
Yeah, because
Angular, yes, is not being used that much. That's okay. Nice.
Don't use it.
It's good to hear that's for the new version as well. That's great. Next question. Why did you settle with X, and what are alternatives? If you looked at that, or maybe some reasons why X was better?
Yeah, so basically the way we came up to this decision is that we were looking all around. I don't remember names anymore because we did it in the beginning of the year, sort of like that, and we had like 7 people looking into this, and everybody was in charge on different things. But we went through all the alternatives, and we just didn't find anything that would meet our criteria. We really wanted something that breaks our build, integrates with our pipelines, has all of these amazing features that it integrates with Descafe, it integrates with your Jest, it integrates with your Storybook, it has a freaking Chrome plugin also, so it has so many things, right? And we just didn't find anything that was also so highly supported by the community, because it's also open source project and everybody can just, benefit from that. So we didn't find it, and probably there is a maybe something that we didn't look into. You never know, but for now, this is the one that we went through because we felt really confident about it. And also Axie has its own community that they do also, I think, yearly really big events like meetups. So they're really popular. That so that was our main reasons. And I cannot really say for the alternatives what would be a reason not to go with, because I cannot remember, but this was really the best that we found from our research that we did.
Nice. All right, great. There are still more questions. We will answer them probably at the end. And if we cannot answer them, I think you will share your email or your contact details. They can always send it to you.
Yes.
Nice. Great Presentation, Daniel. Thank you.
Thank
We
you,
will be
everybody.
going to the next one. That will be Beyond Screen Sizes from Kilian Valkhof. Kilian, if you want, you can share your screen. Then you can start. Let's see. Kilian, are you still there?
Yeah,
Nice.
I'm here. But I'm figuring out how to share my Keynote window, which doesn't show up here in Teams. So if anyone has a bright idea.
That's good that you call us. I don't personally have a bright idea. Can't you share your full screen?
Yeah, I can also do that.
Maybe that's the best option right now.
Yeah.
Let's do that then.
How's this?
Perfect.
Okay, awesome. Hi everyone, I'm Kilian. I've been a web developer for 15 years, but for the last 2 years, I've been working on something else, which is a browser for developers called Polypane. And because of that, I've been working a lot with responsive design and new types of media queries, because Polypane really lets you dig into all sorts of screen sizes, media features, etc. So responsive design as a term was coined 11 years ago. And while I'm sure all of you here today are familiar with the term, I wanted to get a definition up anyway. So responsive design is the way a website adapts to different screen sizes by reflowing and repositioning content as the available space allows. And we do that with media queries, setting either a min width or a max width to adapt our website to the available screen width, but also with things like flexbox and grid layouts, or even CSS functions like clamp and min-max. So before responsive design was a term, we did things a little differently. Back in 2008, I wrote an article for Naar Voren, which some of you might remember, but I'm going to assume most of you don't. So Naar Voren was like the Dutch smashing magazine. So back in 2008, I wrote an article about handheld style sheets. And back then, the way to do web design for mobile devices, one of which you see pictured here, was using the @media handheld media type. Nowadays, this media type is no longer used. We just have @media screen and @media print, and that's basically all. But back then, the prevailing idea was that you would write a completely separate design or style sheet for mobile devices. And as you can as you probably expected, they worked pretty badly. They hardly had any support. You couldn't do a whole lot with them. Images even turned monochrome. However, I ended my article with a small glimmer of hope, because I had read this new CSS specification, and in it they were talking about media features. And it was pretty hopeful, because I spotted 3 very interesting things. One, you could scale your website depending on the width. You could change the design depending on your height. And you could even change depending on the amount of colors your screen could show. Well, that last one wasn't as interesting in the end. But still, nowadays, media queries is the way to go. We're 10 years in now, and of course, support for media queries everywhere is, well, amazing. We all use media queries all day, every day, if we're doing front end. So with that, we also have a pretty good shared understanding, I think, of what responsive design is. I think responsive design is mobile first. Responsive design is built using media queries with widths in ems, and those can be either min width or max width. We use a base font size of 16 pixels, which equates to 1 em. Now, of course, browsers have already done this for the past 20 years, but it just took us front-end developers a while to catch up to them. We always allow user resizing, so people can zoom in everywhere, even on mobile. And of course, scrolling is fine because there is no fold. Now, what we like to do in front end, if we have a term that everyone understands and that we all agree on, is we introduce a new one. So that's what I'm doing now. And that's responsive websites, because I don't think responding to the size of a viewport is enough anymore. I think responsive websites do still respond to viewport sizes, but they also actively adapt to user preferences. And what I mean with that is that we have a bunch of things, user preferences, their environment, their network conditions, and their device capabilities, that can all influence the experience they have with your website. So what I want to do today is go over each of this category, see what's possible in this category, and hopefully you'll learn something along the way. So we'll start with user preferences. Now there's a whole slew of them on the screen right now: reverse color scheme, reduced motion, reduced transparency, contrast, inverted colors, and forced colors. Now half of these don't work yet, as is always the case with new technologies, and especially on the web, but we'll go over them anyway so that you have a firm understanding of them when they end up in browsers, which might be sooner than you think for some of these. We'll start with everyone's favorite, prefers color scheme, or dark mode, really. So prefers color scheme can tell you whether a user prefers a dark or a light version of your website. They might prefer the dark version because it usually has decreased contrast, so it's nicer to read. But conversely, users might prefer the light version of your site because the increased contrast does make it easier to read. There's 2 options for prefers color scheme, dark and light. Now there used to be a 3rd option called prefers color scheme no preference, which was the default. However, it turns out that the default is actually light mode. So the specification and subsequently browsers have removed no preference, and now by default prefers color scheme light is matched, and when you switch your operating system over to a dark mode, prefers color scheme dark matches. Now the best way to implement dark mode is to start over if you already have a light mode website, because that way you can define every single color in the way you need it to. But that's not very realistic. So if you want to add dark mode to an existing website, and I'm just going to assume that it's light mode, then you can use this bit of CSS, which I call cheap dark mode, and I'll explain a little bit how it works. So first what we do is we take this light website and we throw an invert filter on it. And what that means is that everything that's dark becomes light and everything that's light becomes dark. But it doesn't just invert the luminosity or the brightness, it also inverts the color. That means that everything that's blue becomes orange. Now, that's not great if your brand color is blue and then suddenly in dark mode it's orange. So we need to fix that. And the way to fix that is by doing a U rotate of 180 degrees. And when we do a U rotate of 180 degrees, we bring the color back to its original hue or its original value. While this won't match the color perfectly, it'll be a little bit darker or a little bit lighter. It's still pretty good or good enough in most situations. So at this point, we have a dark website in more or less our brand colors. So that's really nice. But if we have used any images or any videos, those will now look terrible. They will look like some scary negative scans of photos. So we need to fix that. And the way to fix that is to just run the filter again. Because if you invert something that's been inverted, you end up with the original. So that's what we'll do. Now, lastly, if you've done this on your own website, you'll notice that your background color hasn't changed along with it, because filter applies to everything in the elements, not the background. So you do need to figure out a nice background color for yourself. Now, in this example, I've used a very dark gray, but for many websites, it will make sense to add a little bit of blue or a little bit of green to this color to break it up a little. And if you do this, what you end up with is something like this. So on the left, we have our regular unchanged website, and on the right, our dark mode. Now, it's not perfect. Things like the button would be nicer if it was still white text on a blue button, but it's pretty good for what amounts to 3 lines of CSS properties. So if you have a website that is in light mode and you want to experiment or offer a dark mode, you can consider this as a reasonable alternative to writing a dark mode from scratch. Now, after prefers color scheme, another very useful feature, also in the context of accessibility, is prefers reduced motion. With prefers reduced motion, users can indicate that they want to see less stuff happening on your screen. Now, that can be because they have, excuse me, they have vestibular disorders, which can make them nauseous when they see motion. Or they get distracted. I need a minute. Okay, there we go. Or they get distracted by all the motion, or even they just don't want to wait for all the animations to finish. They just want to get to your content. So with prefers reduced motion, there's really 2 options, reduce and no preference. And when you implement this, the best course of action is to design your website with no motion, and only when no preference matches, you add in your animations. This way, your website will be accessible by default, and for the people that can appreciate the motion, you can add the animations for them. Now, something to keep in mind here is that the media query says prefers reduced motion and not prefers no motion. And that is because some motion is okay. There are certain types of motion that are less problematic. For example, subtle fades won't be an issue. animations that help understanding, that are triggered upon user action. So a user does something and then an animation plays. So that's something they can anticipate. That's not so much a problem. And those can go into your regular design as well. Now, if you already have a website, here we go again, and you want to introduce reduced motion, then this is a really handy bit of CSS. Now, it's also a very crude bit of CSS because it will just wholesale turn off all animation and transition on your website. Now, this is mostly fine, and your users will definitely appreciate this, but make sure to test with it, because if you have anything that depends on the end state of an animation, for example, transition from transparent to opaque, or a bit of JavaScript that depends on an animation and event, those might not get triggered. So that's something to keep in mind. You can also get to the prefers reduced motion media query using JavaScript with the window.matchMedia function. You can give this any media query. You can even give it multiple media queries. And then with the .matches property, you can check whether or not this media query or this media query string evaluates to true. So you can use this, for example, to stop autoplaying video or to prevent any JavaScript animations from kicking off. Now, these last two are supported everywhere, but the ones I'm going to talk about now, not so much. Some have some support in browsers, but not complete support, and others are not supported at all. For each of them, I'll show a little icon for which browsers have support, and I'll also tell you. So first off, prefers reduced transparency. With prefers reduced transparency, your users can tell you whether or not they want text on patterned backgrounds. So for example, a background image. Now, a user might not want text on a patterned background, even if it looks really cool, because maybe they have some visual impairment, which makes it hard for them to read, or they get easily distracted, or they have something like dyslexia, which makes it harder when there's more stuff going on around the text. Now, then, unfortunately, there's no support yet, but when support lands, these are the two options, reduce and no preference. And like reduced motion, it's probably best to start with the reduced case as the default, and then only when no preference is set, introduce some transparency. Again, it says prefers reduced transparency, not prefers no transparency. So it doesn't mean you have to turn everything off, but it is an indicator that you probably want to make sure that the text, that any text against patterned backgrounds is readable enough. On to prefers contrast. So with prefers contrast, a user can indicate whether they want less or more contrast. Now, they might want more contrast because usually that's easier to read, but they might want less contrast if they have, for example, photophobia or they find it very unpleasant to look at bright screens. Now, support for this isn't great. There's only one of these is implemented yet, prefers contrast more, and that's implemented in the current Safari technology preview, where it matches the increased contrast accessibility option of macOS. What is supported on macOS properly is the inverted colors media query. What the inverted colors media query does is it inverts all the colors. Now, this media query has been around for a while. It has been around since before dark mode in macOS, and honestly, I think it's been more or less superseded by it, because inverted colors is not necessarily an accessibility feature. It's just there for people that prefer darker screens, essentially. And of course, those people would now just be happily running the dark mode of macOS. Now, you might think that you would need to use this media query inverted colors to make sure that all the images are still normal by inverting them back. But you don't have to do that, because Safari, which is the only browser that supports this, already does that for you. So while all the colors will be inverted, videos and images will be left alone. You could, of course, still use a filter with a U rotate to make sure that you go back to your original brand colors. And the two values for these are inverted colors none or inverted colors inverted. On the Windows side, we don't have inverted colors, we have forced colors. And forced colors is a whole nother ballgame. Because what happens with forced colors is basically all your styling gets thrown out. Your layout is preserved, but all the colors will be exchanged for colors chosen by the user. Now, usually these are very high contrast color schemes, like white on black or black on white, but they don't have to be. The user gets full control over the colors they choose for text, for background, for buttons. And so it also happens that forced colors is active, but a user has a very dim sepia type of color scheme, which they just prefer. So forced colors doesn't necessarily tell you it's like a very high contrast. It just tells you if it's active or not. And when it's active, all your colors have already been replaced. So that's also why it doesn't say prefers. Now, there's not much for you to do at that point because your design has already been completely hauled over. But some parts of your website might not have transitioned correctly. For example, SVG icons might have a regular text color in your normal design, but when forced colors becomes active, that color doesn't propagate. At that point, you can use these CSS color names to pick the one that fits best for these specific elements. So for SVG icons, probably you will want to use canvas text. And these named colors are mapped to the color scheme that the user chose. So there's the text content, background, selected text, buttons, link colors, and disabled text. And for some of them, also the background. Now, these last three that I mentioned, forced colors, prefers contrast, and inverted colors, they might seem very familiar or might seem very similar, but really they're not. And you shouldn't treat them as such. With forced colors, the user has made an explicit choice to force their own color scheme onto everything on their device, including your website. And it's up to you to make sure that all of your website remains correctly visible in this situation. With prefers contrast, a user would also similarly like to see a higher contrast version of your website, but they still want to see your website. They still want to see your colors and your style. They just want increased contrast. Lastly, inverted colors really doesn't make any sort of accessibility claim. Inverted colors just means that the colors are inverted. And honestly, at this point, people will probably sooner go to a dark mode and prefers color scheme rather than inverted colors.
Kilian, can you round
Now-
up your presentation, by the way? Time.
Yeah, sure. I'll speed it up a little.
Nice, thank you. Questions, can we can do that afterwards, so that will be fine.
Sure. So the light level value will tell you whether the device a person is using is in a dark room, in a normally lighted room, or in bright sunlight. And it will do that with light level dim, light level normal, or light level washed. And the idea is that operating systems will use their existing light sensors to send this information to the browser. And the operating system will determine when something is dim and when something is washed. Now, what you'll want to do at this point is when a user is in a dim room, it's probably nice to remove some of the blues of your website, maybe additionally darken your website, though keep in mind that the operating system, of course, already dims the screen. And in wash situations, for example, when you're looking at a phone in bright sunlight, you'll want to increase the contrast between the text and the background color so that the text remains visible even behind a reflective screen. Now, I'll skip over the device capabilities part, but I do think prefers reduced data is pretty important, so I'll go through that quickly. So prefers reduced data is a media query, but before that existed, there was a HTTP header called save data on that your browser can send to indicate to the server that they want to preserve data or they want to save data. For example, for people with a slow internet connection, a bad internet connection, a data cap, or people that just prefer speedy websites. And this is super powerful because your server can then send whatever it wants in response to this header. It can send completely different images, even a completely different website if it wants to. But because it happens on the server, it's not so easy to do. For example, we as front-end developers usually don't get access to the server configuration. And even if you did, it might be hard to send alternative content in a highly dynamic environment like a CMS. So instead, the prefers reduced data media query, which you can use right now in Polypane and with some extra configuration in Chrome, can more or less do the same, but in CSS. So while this won't let you send a completely different website, you can still use it to prevent web fonts from being loaded or large background images. You can use it to prevent polling or preloading through JavaScript. And you can still have a very big impact on the performance of your website for people that need that. Now, the save data header is also available right now in JavaScript on the navigator.connection API. So you can use that right now today in Chrome and Firefox to check whether a user prefers to save data, but also using the effective type value if they happen to have a slow connection. Now, what's interesting about effective type is that it doesn't check just type of internet connection you have, but it also factors in your download speed and how long it took to connect to the server to combine that into an effective type. So that means that even if you're on a wired connection, but the wired connection is super slow, it can still resolve to slow 2G, and you can still choose to prevent preloading videos or prevent polling and provide a better experience that way. So skip over these. These are a number of different ways you can provide a much more user-centric website. check them out. Check out Polypane, which is a really cool browser that I happen to make and show you a bunch of demos with. And that's it for me. I'm Kilian. You can find me on kilianvalkhof.com, on Twitter using @KilianValkhof, and Polypane you can find on polypane.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Kilian. I think everybody can do the nice applause emoticon. That's always good, the nice new feature of Microsoft Teams. It was really nice to see a bit of a history lesson as well. We will do the questions afterwards. But I think in general, we like the specific examples and also see what the code did with the examples in front of it. So that's really nice to see. There's a lot of talk about, so I guess that's why there's a little bit time shortage, but that's no problem. I really liked it that you talked about all kind of subjects, such as support as well for the browsers. That's also very important and sometimes forgotten with new cool features. So that's good. Nice. Thank you. We will go to Drazen. He will talk about why your AA still fails. Drazen, the floor is yours. You can share your slides. If there are any questions for Kilian, then please put them in the chat. We will answer them at the end. Nice. We see your slides, Drazen.
Cool. I don't. Hold up. Just joking. I can see that as well.
Nice.
Let's go.
Good luck.
So, well, first a little bit about me. My name is Drazen Jankovic. I've been in this business basically for like 16 years now, doing front end of all sorts, doing also some back end, a lot of designing, UX research. I've done video editing, audio editing, you know, like the whole full stack experience. That's my jack of all trades. In my hobbies, I may do a lot of cosplaying, prop making, also some sports, a little bit less now with all of the Corona things going on. And as one of the final things, and also what really got me into accessibility, is I teach people about living with cancer and how that is, as I myself went through it. This is also what got me into the first contact with people that have disabilities and how they go day in, day out. And that changed my mindset a little bit on what I want to do with my development experience. So let's get into it. Well, Daniel already went a little bit through what accessibility is. Basically explained a little bit of these 4 main points of accessibility. And he mentioned A11Y. That entire thing, really, people should forget. I don't know why they chose it, because it's not an accessible term. It actually breaks 5. I've put down the 4 main ones, but it breaks 5 of its own rules to have that term, because it can be also read as ally. A11Y, accessibility. It's an abbreviated term, which means you can't use it if you want to be accessible. So, you know, things like that. Now, the whole point of this presentation is about what are some of the pitfalls when it comes to accessibility. And there's actually 2 big parts of it. There is the part of the organizational pitfalls, and then there's the part of the things that we as front-enders can do, like the development, design, user experience, quite a lot of it. So for the organizational part, I'm just going to keep it to 1 slide because you can read more by Sherry Byron-Haber. She's a CPAC certified, so her level is like here, while I'm still about here. When it comes to these things, especially organizational. But when it comes to things, the big 4 pitfalls are lack of executive interest. See this as, you know, you have a few designers, few developers, they're like, yeah, we want to implement accessibility. And your boss goes, no, it's going to take us time. It's going to take us money. It's going to do this. It's going to do that. So you have to get those people involved. And one of the biggest things to do is often you hear in presentations and from developers and designers go, but our end users can use it more easily. They don't care. That doesn't bring money. But if you say, we can get you more users, suddenly that, you know, rings a little bell of, hey, that's a little bit of extra money that we can get. So it's all about how you word things, whether you will get your executives on board or not. Second organizational bit is there is no ownership. There's always one or two people maybe doing it, but nobody's actually owning the entire project. Nobody is saying like, hey, from design day one all the way to the end of the project, we are in charge, making sure that the accessibility is going right. And if that's not there, then, you know, things can slip through the cracks. People forget some things and so on. Third point is the theoreticians and pretenders. Basically, I started out as a theoretician, meaning I knew every single rule of the WCAG. I knew it up to the dot. Never implemented it, so I didn't know what to do with it. So just knowing the theory and actually implementing it, seeing it in use, seeing it throughout all of the different browsers, all of the different devices, that's where you really get. On the other hand, you have the pretenders. These are the people that go like, well, you know, our website is accessible. We did this, this, and this. But then when you check it, the website actually isn't accessible. And this has actually caused multiple lawsuits in the US, but also here in Europe, where I believe the highest payout was $17.4 million because they claimed they were accessible, but they weren't. So somebody messed up on their form, which gave them some financial problems, and you know, the ball started rolling that way. And then there's a whole bit of UX personas, and I believe Martin in chat just even mentioned it, like, hey, has anybody tested actually with people who have disabilities? The personas we make during our UX research phases, often you have like maybe 6 or 10 personas. Not one has a single disability in their profile. There's no color blindness, there's no cognitive issues, there's no motor issues, there's nothing. So if you base your entire UX profile on, hey, everybody's actually perfectly fine, what you're gonna get is a product that's not perfectly fine for everyone because you never took everyone in. So those are the 4 points. If you look up the article, The Perilous Pitfalls of Accessibility Maturity by Sherry, she has a list of 20 of these. In my opinion, if you get these 4, you'll already be higher up in the chain than most other companies. Now we come to the bits that we as front-enders, full stackers, designers, UXers, that we can actually do. Like I said, Daniel also went a little bit through this. There's the whole levels, AA, A, and so on. And what do they mean? For most cases, if you do AA, you're perfectly fine. Having a AAA website is very hard to reach, first of all. And second, not many actually need that level of accessibility. It's very rare cases where you need this. So your test complies, everything comes out as AA. Well, depending on where you are, it doesn't really matter that you comply to the WCAG AA test. There's 37 different laws across the world. Some of them are covered by WCAG, most aren't. So just because you are compliant with WCAG doesn't mean that you actually are compliant with your local laws. So you have to check those out as well. Make sure that you meet them. If we take a look just at a few of these, the Australian Disability Act of '92. Hey, if you do WCAG, perfect. In Australia, your website is perfect. If you are in Canada and you meet WCAG rules, the Human Rights Act has things in it against discrimination for disability that's not covered by WCAG. Same for China. In the Netherlands, we also have certain rules in the Wetgeving Digitale Toegankelijkheid, which basically says, hey, if you meet WCAG, you're good. But also we have a little bit of extra that you need to add. So, you know, there's a little bit of give and take there. For instance, in the US, it's not that mandatory to have a lower level of literacy in your accessibility. While in the Netherlands, depending on what project you do, literacy is included, meaning you need to be able to do A2, A1, B1, and B2 language capabilities and not make everything C1 or C2, which is for fluent people. And then there's the United States. They have 5 different laws. I picked out one that's kind of funny. It's fully in the WCAG, but this one is specifically for airplanes. Because airplanes, since 1986, have a little screen with a little bit of controls in it, and you need to be able to use those controls. So accessibility is included in there as well. And if your web project doesn't meet it, you could actually fail a test because your website cannot be used on an airplane. So again, please remember, what is your target audience? In what country is your audience? And are there any laws that need to be held up with it? Now, we had a few automated tests shown before, Axsuit, for instance. Everybody's making design systems, perfect. It is to have a design system. It's just really good. All of your code is in one point. Your design is controlled by the same thing, and so on. You will never have any deviance of it, except that you can get deviance. And automated tests are often run on just a component, maybe a subset of 2 components, like a composite of 2 things. And it will often say, well, this is perfectly accessible. I mean, the button on the left, dark green, white letters, yeah, it will pass. Same button on the right, it will fail. It will fail 100% of the time. Because when you manually check everything, you'll see that, well, which one of these 2 buttons is more important because they're exactly the same. I can't see the state of these buttons when they're on a green background, and the green background is allowed according to our design system. So when you're making your automated tests, it's a very small percentage that they do check. So give them as much information as you can. Give them different backgrounds for your buttons, different backgrounds for your banners, and so on. Provide them as much information as possible. Otherwise, you'll fail your test on these little things. And to get accreditation for your website is fairly expensive. It can be up to 10,000 euros for just 5 pages for somebody to manually check. So, you don't want to have to pay too much money each time. Well, ARIA will solve it. We heard ARIA mentioned before. ARIA will not solve it. ARIA is actually one of the most misused things when it comes to accessibility. It's unfortunate, but it is. It was basically added to make the content more richer for devices, provide them with extra information that visually shouldn't be there, but it does add a little bit extra for those that can't see, can't hear, can't move correctly or whatever. So that's why ARIA was added. But what we don't see is we don't see ARIA support in every browser. We don't see it in every assistive piece of technology. We don't see it in every piece of operating system. So what you then get is you have a website filled with ARIA, but only half of it maybe is supported. So look for what are you using? Should it be used? If not, can I replace it with something native? Another part that makes ARIA support very low is that some of the assistive software is very expensive. So users are not willing to change. Daniel mentioned a few, and those are all free. But the high-end software can go up to 15 to 20,000 euros basically per piece of software that you need. Are you then willing to easily just, I'm going to upgrade. It's only going to be another 15,000 maybe. Yeah. Or I'm going to switch after investing that much money. So what you then get is the most common pitfalls with it are things like, well, I used roles, but somehow it doesn't recognize it. Well, roles are case sensitive. Adding ARIA in front of everything doesn't make it an ARIA attribute. You really need to check, is it a real attribute, yes or no? So, and the same with roles. Role error is something I've seen often, especially with when you get validation errors. It's like ARIA role error, role error. It's like none of those exist. It's nice that you put it, and I see that you want to add the effort to it, but they don't exist. So please look into that. And the most misused is native and implied semantics. When you take a look at how often somebody has made a div, given that the role is button, added everything that a button does, all of the hovers, the actives, the focus, and everything, then use a button. Why are you using a div? I mean, I can understand that you might want to have it do something else, but then it's better to extend the button than to misuse another element and make it work as something else. Because in your browser, that div that looks like a button, acts like a button, hey, it will perfectly work as a button. Put it on a device that has no idea what role button is, and you have a beautiful div that has a click and nothing else. So that's why you have to really be careful on what you do. Don't overextend what you're doing, and especially don't overextend elements that don't need it. I'm actually getting near the end of this. It's cool because I expect more questions. So what people often forget is that media has to be accessible as well. And Daniel already explained, if you add an alt text to your image, that's good, perfect. Make sure especially that it's very descriptive of what you're doing. If you have audio, make sure there's a transcript available. I believe that this entire meeting is also being transcribed as we speak now. Same for video. Make sure that there's subtitles. Make sure that the subtitles are actually visible, and make sure that there's a full transcript available. But also, make sure your PDFs are accessible. If you have media on your website that's downloadable, then it has to be accessible based on the same ruling from WCAG. And they actually have a very nice website explaining every piece of tech. Posted down for the link for the PDF, but they have it for everything else available. Just like how your page has semantic HTML structure, a PDF has a logical structure. It has your header, it has a footer, it has the content. Use it. Tagged PDF. You can go even further. Now you can actually make an accessible form inside your PDF and so on. Like I said, I'm nearing the end because I plan to do it in 10 minutes. I went to 15. Oh, I feel ashamed.
Nice, Drazen.
Contact me via LinkedIn. I would like to post my Twitter, but I know what kind of posts I post on Twitter, so let's not do that. So yeah, LinkedIn is preferable if you have any questions that I can't answer right now. But if you have questions now, yeah, sure.
Nice, thank you, Drazen. Again, I already see some applause coming in. The emoticons, it's always good to see. Very cool to see a bit of accessibility in organizations, and very interesting as well. Normally people say do this, do that, but you are saying don't do this. And also look at the pitfalls with the strong opinion as well. Cool to see some pros and cons. So that's very nice to see. I think in total we had a very cool presentation. Let's see, are there any questions for Drazen? Tristan asked for a link about the Google page explaining their A11Y requirements when they crawl onto an extra web page. So that's a nice one.
I don't have a Google page, mostly because if you go to the WCAG page, they have this really nice check sheet that you can just go. Like, I want only the A and the double A, and then it will just give you a list of rules. Follow them, go one by one. Again, you can do a lot through automated things. Lighthouse, Axe, Wave, they will help you on component-based, but don't trust them on a full page-based. So for the full page, go to the WCAG, get the list, and do it yourself. It's going to take some time, but you will get a far better result for your final product.
Nice. I think that pretty much answered the question of Tristan. Very good, Drazen. I also saw some links being shared in the chat. That's always nice. Very good. For instance, Leonard sharing links. Also, Daniel sharing links. That's always great to see. And Christian as well. So there is enough to research for everybody.
I actually see a comment by Martijn Vuchteveen. We worked on a project together, making an insurance website actually AAA accessible. We managed it mostly because we just removed elements that were just too hard to do. We found different ways to do them. The foundation that was checking our work to make sure that we were accessible, their own website cannot reach that level. So again, it's really nice to go for that AAA, but do that as a side project. Don't make that your main thing. Your main goal is have accessibility from the start as AA. Have your UX look at it, your business look at it, and make sure that it's at the core, just like the UX is at the core.
Nice. I think that's a great ending of your presentation, Drazen. Very good ending. Thank you. I will share my screen again. We're going to round up the lightning talks. Of course, if there are any questions left, we will answer them very shortly. In the end, first of all, I want to thank all the speakers for presenting their very cool presentations. We had a wide program, we had different companies as well. So that's very cool to see and come with each other and discuss about different subjects. So that's great. I will remind you guys again, we will be doing this more every 2 months is the goal, but this is not final. So if you want a subject or a request, we will send a link with a feedback form shortly. And if you want to present, that's also possible, of course, just like Drazen, Daniel, or Kilian. Then please contact the meetup organizers. We are open to that and also open to new ideas. Without further ado, are there any leftover questions? Let's see the chat.
There is one question from Christian Jack.
Nice. Yeah, sure. Question: what level of accessibility is applied to back office internal systems to meet employee rights?
Yeah, I already answered it. Basically, you need to look at your local worker rights. Again, the list is on WCAG. If you look for policy law, it will show you a whole list of your local laws regarding to discrimination acts. And it's usually in there. So for most countries, keep a general AA and you should be fine.
Nice, great. Thank you, Drazen. I will round it up. I will also stop the recording in a few seconds. Please, if you want to fill in the feedback form, that would be great, so we can provide you with even more awesomeness as well. 4 small questions, probably 1 minute to fill it all in. And also like to refer to our meetup page. And of course, Sosti for facilitating this amazing meetup, in my opinion. I will stop the recording right now. We will share it. We will also share the slides and additional information. We will contact you via Meetup with the email functionality, of course. And if you want to contact Daniel, Kilian, or Drazen about some content, they shared their details as well. So I think that will be good. Thank you, everybody, for joining. It was great having you here. And have a nice evening. If you want, you can still chill a bit here, but this is the ending.